We have some political news regarding the 2020 presidential campaign. Moments ago, the 2016 Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton endorsed Joe Biden for president of the United States. She appeared with him in a virtual town hall. Here's how some of that went down.
I am thrilled to be part of your campaign, to not only endorse you, but to help highlight a lot of the issues that are at stake in this presidential election. So I want to add my voice to the many who have endorsed you to be our president. Just think of what a difference it would make right now if we had a president who not only listened to the science, put facts over fiction, but brought us together.
Joining our conversation now is NBC's Mike Memoli. He's been covering the Biden campaign since its launch and before that. So, Mike, here's my question for you. I've studied this endorsement, and as a former sort of strategist, I've wondered which part of the Hillary Clinton brand will most help Joe Biden. And to me, it seems like her exquisite preparation as Secretary of State and as a U.S. Senator would be the piece that I would want to inject if I were the Joe Biden campaign. What are they hoping to get from Clinton's endorsement today?
Well, it's so interesting, Nicole, because you remember a few weeks ago when President Obama ended sort of a long week of endorsements, including Bernie Sanders. We also saw Elizabeth Warren that week. A number of people said, well, now everybody in the party has endorsed Joe Biden. And somebody reminded me, we haven't yet heard from the last nominee of the Democratic Party for president and the first woman to do so. And that's, of course, Hillary Clinton. And the way that the Biden campaign has rolled these out is interesting. We saw Al Gore last week make his endorsement official on Earth Day, and the two of them had a long conversation about the environment, which is such an important issue for young voters, especially in this campaign. And so today we're seeing Hillary Clinton make her endorsement official, joining Biden as they begin to make a focus on women voters. Of course, so important to Democrats taking back the House in 2018. And of course, Democrats need a huge surge of support from women just as high in the fall to beat Donald Trump. And it was interesting to hear the back and forth between these two. Of course, they've known each other a long time. Biden introduced Clinton, in fact, to this discussion as the woman who should be president of the United States right now. And Clinton, for her part, said, I wish you were president right now. And as you heard her say, wouldn't it be great to have a president who showed the kind of empathy that we've seen from Biden over the years? So the question, of course, naturally would be, when do we see these two on the campaign trail together? But as you know, none of us are on the campaign trail. The two of them doing this town hall from their homes, and Biden getting ready to dig in on the next big decision for him, which is what woman he is going to choose as his running mate. We expect that committee to be announced in the days ahead.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.